Two really long books ate up most of my reading time this month, so we only have 4 books to talk about this month. Incredibly Bright Creatures is something that I read mostly for fun. The summary promised me a friendship between an old woman and an octopus, and that sounded so whimsical, so I read it. And yes, that aspect is present, but I do not believe that it fully delivered on that promise. How do I tell you about the plot of this book without revealing spoilers? So this old woman, she's kind of lost in life. She lost most of her family. She now only has this job at an aquarium where she meets that octopus. And then there is this guy who's looking for family and is also lost, and he gets a job in that same aquarium and they bond. Yeah, I guess that's right. This is contemporary fiction that is mostly based on plots, and it poses as if it has character work. It doesn't. It's obvious with most of the characters beyond the octopus. The octopus might just have an arc. The rest of them, they have conflicts, they have emotions, but no significant development or progress. That young man, he's kind of a screw-up. Over the course of the story, he tries to find his absentee father to extort him for money, really, but for some catharsis, I would imagine, too. So he should be the one to change, to grow, to find meaning over the course of the story. And he does, but most of that happens either off-screen or there's not enough introspection in it. The old woman's arc is also confusing because she needs to find meaning in her life, having lost all of her family, but I do not think that it worked all that well. Because the character resolution doesn't come from within, but from the external forces, and I do not think that it's necessarily development. This is driving me insane. The book relies heavily on a reveal that I'm not going to tell you about, but we as an audience find out before the midpoint of the book, so after that it's mostly us waiting for the characters to catch up and to figure out what's going on. And I do not think that it is as engaging as the author might have hoped for. The only thing that I truly enjoyed was the octopus. There are a few chapters sprinkled throughout from its POV, and he has that grumpy old man personality. It was fun. And in case you're worried, he does make it till the end, so that's good. There is a movie based on this book that either came out this year or is coming out this year, 2026 basically. And I think that this plot might just work better on screen. Because there is just enough plots and character work for a 90-minute movie, but not for a 300-page book. Overall, not truly bad, but also not something to write home about. What was fun was a series about Wooster and Jeeves. There is a collection that I read, I'm not sure which one, it must be one of the first ones. This is British fiction and British humor at its finest, and I love it. By some weird twist of fate, I haven't seen the Hugh Laurie Stephen Fry TV show, even though it came recommended to me by 2 dear friends of mine, but I am actually kind of glad that I now have read the book first. That's how I like to consume my media, the book first and the screen adaptation after. And the series reminded me a little bit of Sherlock Holmes, not in the genre necessarily, but in the way that it is structured. There are these 2 men, very gay-coded by the way. We don't know how they met. We do not know much about them, but we just get to see an episode in their lives. I don't think I've read many series like that. It mostly is reserved for the detective stories genre, I think, but it does work well in a humor setting too. So every story is an episode in their lives. The conflicts and the settings vary a little bit. There are also recurring secondary characters like Wooster's friend Bingo, who has love troubles, or Wooster's cousins who come in to wreak havoc. And it's all very simple and silly and fun, and normally with a twist at the end about how Jeeves manages to sort out whatever this conflict was. The stories, they are vaguely interconnected by these characters, but they can all be read as a standalone. The characters are also really fun with distinct personalities. I absolutely love that most of the conflicts between Jeeves and Wooster specifically come from a piece of clothing, the one that Wooster loves and Jeeves despises. And normally at the end of the story, Jeeves manages to save the day and Wooster gets rid of that offending piece of clothing. And you tell me they're not gay. And yeah, for humor stories from the early 20th century, they are kind of fun. They are not too deep, they don't take themselves too seriously. And honestly, that's what I needed while I was fighting my way through Dr. Zhivago. So I will definitely read more about these characters at some point. And definitely watch the TV show. The Great Alone by Kristin I really, really enjoyed. For about half of the novel, I was thinking, this is what contemporary fiction needs to look like. It has a plot, the character work is there, and it also deals with a heavy and complicated subject because, well, the book is about domestic violence. And yes, the first half of the book really works. The book is set in the 1970s and is mostly told from the POV of a teenage girl called Lenny, as her father, a Vietnam vet, decides to take the family on a whim to Alaska to live off the land. Unfortunately, the harsh conditions of the land and the darkness only amplifies the darkness within him, as his undiagnosed PTSD from his time in captivity in Nam manifests as violence towards his wife, Lenny's mother. And honestly, I felt like the way that the author works with this theme is true to reality. How such behaviors appear, how they manifest, the dynamics that exist with its relationships, how the wife believes that she can fix him, how she loves him and tries to take part of the blame for his abuse, how she tries to hide it from Lenny, and how even when it gets really bad, she's still unwilling to leave him for a variety of reasons, some logical and some not. And since we watch most of it through the eyes of the daughter, we get to see that side too, how it affects her, how she bonds with her mother, and how her love for her father mixes with fear. There is a chilling but honest moment in there when he hits the mother for the first time in front of Lenny, and Lenny realizes that it happened before, that it wasn't just verbal abuse or just grabbing her a little bit too harshly, that it was physical abuse. It hits. The second half of the book, unfortunately, is a little bit weaker. I felt like it leaned a little bit too much into the melodrama. It's a lot more action-packed, and I think a lot of the time unnecessarily. Maybe Hannah wanted to raise the stakes, as if they weren't high enough already, with these two women stuck in a cabin with an unstable man in the middle of Alaskan winter. There is a romantic plot that happens with Lenny, and that's where I felt the book started losing momentum, because that particular storyline is very Romeo and Juliet coded, but not in a good way. And then after that, it all goes full soap opera. One event is less believable than the next. The only true event I felt was the resolution with the father. I think that's how it often plays out, even if what leads to it is kind of stupid. On the other side of the spectrum, there is an episode that annoyed me at the end there. If you read the book, it's when Lenny comes back to Alaska. And the author sets up a conflict in one chapter and resolves it in the next via Deus Ex Machina. And realistically, she could have cut the entire thing out and nobody would have cared. Maybe she felt she needed it to make it believable, but it only shattered my suspension of disbelief more. Overall, I can definitely recommend this book if the subject matter doesn't scare you off. It's well written, there is plot, there is character work, the theme is explored to its fullest potential. The language is also really nice. She paints a beautiful picture of the Alaskan landscape too. I've read Kristin Hannah before. I've read The Nightingale. That was actually the first book that I read during COVID lockdown, and isn't that a choice? And I also have The Women sitting on the shelf somewhere that's waiting for me. I'm not sure if I'm gonna jump straight to it, but I will definitely come back to it. This right here might have been a mistake. I've promised that I would read Steinbeck, and I was wafting between this book here and East of Eden, and from my cultural osmosis I felt like East of Eden might have just too much religious imagery for me to handle right now. It is a Cain and Abel story, isn't it? So I instead went for this. This is Grapes of Wrath. And yes, it still has a lot of religious imagery in it, but what can you do? Fun fact about this copy here, it's more of a prop for this video really, because I started reading it here and I wasn't feeling it. There was something off about the language of the novel, and I know that Steinbeck won a Nobel Prize, so I was like, there's something wrong. So I looked up an ebook in English and oh my god, they didn't even try with this translation. To be fair, Russian doesn't have accents and dialects in the same way that English does, but I still think they should have done something to portray that southern accent that makes up most of this book. Because it is important. It is important for the characterization of these people, where they come from, them being called Okies and all. And here they speak like proper Russian, so it washes out all of that context, so I read the ebook from that point on. The story, if you're not familiar, is about this family from Oklahoma who, during the Great Depression, are being pushed out from their land, and so they make it for California to find work there. And obviously, speaking of religious imagery, it's an Exodus story, but there is a different comparison that I want to make, and it's a really weird one. As a child, I read this children's story called The Blue Arrow, I think, by Gianni Rodari. And as all of those early children's stories, it's kind of messed up. The story is that there is this magical toy shop, and on Christmas, the toys run away from it to deliver themselves as gifts to a certain little boy. And as they travel the snowed-in streets, they encounter different people who might just need a little magic in their lives. So the toys start kind of staying with these different people. There is a moment where a toy, a doll I think, stays with a little girl who freezes to death in the streets. Very little magic, I'll call it, and no, I'm not crying. But it felt like this here too. Because over the course of the journey, the characters disappear one right after the other for different reasons. Is that also a thing from the Bible? Is the blue arrow also a biblical retelling? I wouldn't be surprised. As far as the book itself, I cannot say that I particularly loved it, didn't hate it either. I wouldn't also say that it is boring. Well, it kind of is, but mostly it just didn't engage me enough. I read it over the course of a couple of days, obviously, and every time I went to pick it up, I was like, do I want to continue? And that's not a sign of a great book. The subject matter is also very era-specific, weirdly, because this theme of capitalism crushing the little guy is as relevant now as it ever was, but this framing of the Great Depression and people just learning what soul-crushing machine capitalism truly is doesn't do the theme justice somehow. Because this through line of mystifying banks into these dragon-like creatures who set off to destroy people's lives and not them being a line of decisions made by people is gauche. And I know that it is Great Depression, but it still feels weird for Americans to be complaining about capitalism. It's like Soviets complaining about communism. This is part of your identity. What are you complaining about? Also, the mood of the novel is so depressing. Even the flickers of light and hope when people band together to help each other out are so few and far between, and they also normally end in tragedy that it's not helping. All that is not what I enjoy in my books. This is why I hate Dostoevsky. He's also suffering for suffering's sake and showing it to us. And on top of all that, I don't like books that simply stop and not end, like this one. And I understand why Steinbeck didn't end it properly. There is no way of doing that. There is no happy ending for these characters. And honestly, with the way that the book is structured and characters disappearing over the course of the story and thus not knowing what happens to them, it makes sense that we also don't know if these characters at the end make it and how. But Steinbeck still chose a very weird moment to stop. For me personally, a more poignant moment happens a little bit earlier, and I apologize, spoilers, but that's when Uncle John buries the dead child in the river, in a twisted version of Moses, yes. But that moment encapsulated this entire novel and the resolution of the entire novel because it works with the family storyline and with the theme. Because that family that they tried so hard to preserve is dead, like that child is. But also Uncle John cries out something like, maybe now they'll see what they're doing to us. And that works with the theme. So that's where the book ended for me, even if it went on for a couple more pages. Overall, I cannot say that I was particularly impressed with this book, so I would go out and seek out more Steinbeck straight away, but I think I will come back and read East of Eden at some point, just not straight away. In August, this month, I'm only reading female authors. I did it last year. I read Austen and the Bronte sisters, and I think it would be a fun tradition for me to have. And I think that will extend to the main video for this channel. I think I will be reading a female author, Teffy, if you want to read up ahead.